The United States and Russia, two titans locked in a struggle for global dominance, their influence stretching across continents and shaping the course of history. Their rivalry has shaped the world for over a century, influencing political landscapes, economic policies, and even cultural trends. From the ashes of World War II to the fall of the Berlin Wall, their actions have left an indelible mark on the world. From the jungles of Vietnam to the mountains of Afghanistan, their military engagements have been both direct and indirect, often involving other nations in their power play. It has been a clash of ideologies, a battle of wills, a game of chess played on a global scale, with each move calculated to gain an upper hand. Their story is not just a history lesson, it is a cautionary tale, a narrative that warns of the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of global ambition, a reminder of the fragility of peace and the ever-present potential for conflict, highlighting the thin line between diplomacy and war. This is the story of their tumultuous relationship, a saga filled with moments of tension and brief periods of cooperation, a story of alliances forged and broken, of brinkmanship and espionage, where covert operations often dictated the course of events, of proxy wars and nuclear threats, where the world stood on the brink of annihilation multiple times. This is the untold story of the USA and Russia's fight for global supremacy, a narrative that continues to evolve even today. World War II. A common enemy brought them together, the United States and the Soviet Union. An unlikely alliance of convenience, they fought side by side against Nazi Germany, but even as they celebrated victory, the seeds of mistrust were sown. The US emerged from the war as a superpower, its economy booming, its military unmatched. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was devastated. Millions dead, its infrastructure in ruins. Yet it had proven its might on the battlefield, and its leader, Joseph Stalin, was determined to expand Soviet influence. The wartime alliance began to unravel. Suspicion and paranoia poisoned the relationship. The US feared the spread of communism. The Soviets resented American power. Two systems, two ideologies on a collision course. The Cold War was inevitable. Winston Churchill called it an Iron Curtain. It descended across Europe, dividing east from west. On one side, the United States and its allies. On the other, the Soviet Union and its satellite states. The world was now a chessboard, each superpower maneuvering for advantage. The US adopted a strategy of containment, its goal to prevent the further spread of communism. It poured billions into rebuilding Europe through the Marshall Plan. It formed military alliances like NATO, a show of force against Soviet aggression. The Soviets responded in kind. They established the Warsaw Pact, a military alliance of their own. They tightened their grip on Eastern Europe. The arms race was on, both sides amassing vast nuclear arsenals. The world watched with bated breath. Fear and uncertainty became the norm. The world held its breath, gripped by an unprecedented sense of dread and uncertainty. The threat of nuclear annihilation loomed large, casting a dark shadow over everyday life. The US and the Soviet Union engaged in a perilous game of one-upmanship, each side unwilling to back down. Each new weapon, each technological breakthrough heightened the stakes, pushing the world closer to the brink. Espionage became the new battlefield, where secrets were the most valuable currency. The CIA and the KGB, locked in a deadly shadow war, fought for supremacy in the shadows. Spies infiltrated governments, stole secrets, and carried out covert operations, often risking their lives. From the streets of Berlin to the halls of power in Washington and Moscow, the battle raged silently, unseen by the public. The space race became another arena for competition, a new frontier for demonstrating technological superiority. Both superpowers poured resources into rocketry and space exploration, hoping to outdo each other. The Soviet Union struck first, launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, in 1957, shocking the world. The US redoubled its efforts, determined to catch up and surpass their rivals in the space race. The world marveled at the technological prowess, but also shuddered at the potential consequences of this relentless competition, fearing what might come next. Section 5, Cuba. 13 days on the brink. October 1962. The world teetered on the precipice of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the most dangerous confrontation of the Cold War. The Soviet Union had secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US mainland. For 13 agonizing days, the world watched and waited. US President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev engaged in a high-stakes game of chicken. Blockades were imposed, ultimatums issued. The threat of nuclear war hung heavy in the air. Finally, a breakthrough. Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba. In return, the US secretly promised to remove its missiles from Turkey. The crisis was averted, but the world had glimpsed the abyss. Section 6, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, battles on distant shores. These conflicts were not just isolated incidents, but were deeply intertwined with the larger geopolitical struggle of the Cold War. The Cold War was not just a war of words and ideologies. It was a global contest for influence and power, with both superpowers vying for dominance. It was also fought on distant battlefields where the stakes were high and the human cost immense. In proxy wars, the US and the Soviet Union supported opposing sides in conflicts around the globe. These wars were a way for both superpowers to exert their influence without direct confrontation. Vietnam and Afghanistan became the most brutal examples. These countries were torn apart by the competing interests of the US and the Soviet Union. In Vietnam, the US intervened to prevent the Communist North from taking over the South. This intervention was part of a broader strategy to contain the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. The Soviets provided arms and support to the North Vietnamese, seeing an opportunity to expand their influence in the region. The war dragged on for years, a bloody stalemate that claimed millions of lives. The human suffering was immense, with countless civilians caught in the crossfire. Afghanistan became another Cold War battleground. The rugged terrain and determined resistance made it a challenging conflict for the Soviets. When the Soviet Union invaded in 1979, the US armed and supported the Afghan Mujahideen. This support was part of a covert operation to weaken Soviet influence. Among them, a young Osama bin Laden, who would later become a notorious figure in global terrorism. The Soviets were eventually forced to withdraw, but Afghanistan was left in ruins. The conflict had lasting repercussions for the region. These proxy wars had a devastating human cost. Entire communities were displaced, and the social fabric of these nations was torn apart. They also fueled resentment and mistrust between the superpowers. The ideological divide seemed insurmountable, with each side deeply suspicious of the other's intentions. The Cold War seemed intractable. The world watched as the two superpowers continued their dangerous dance, with the threat of nuclear annihilation always looming in the background. Section 7 cracks in the empire. The Soviet Union crumbles. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was in trouble. Its economy was stagnating. Its people were restless for change. The costs of the arms race and the war in Afghanistan had taken their toll. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union. He introduced reforms, glasnost or openness, and perestroika or restructuring. But the reforms were too late. The Soviet Empire was crumbling. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, a symbol of Soviet oppression. Its demise signaled the end of the Cold War. In 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. It dissolved into 15 independent states. The Cold War was over. The US had won. Section 8, A Bear Awakened. Putin's Russia flexes its muscles. The collapse of the Soviet Union left a void in global power. The US emerged as the sole superpower. But Russia, the largest of the former Soviet republics, was not content to remain on the sidelines. Under Vladimir Putin, who came to power in 2000, Russia has reasserted itself on the world stage. It has flexed its military muscles in Chechnya, Georgia, and Ukraine. It has interfered in elections in the US and other Western democracies. Putin's Russia is a revanchist power. It seeks to restore its lost glory and influence. It sees the US and its allies as obstacles to its ambitions. Tensions between the two countries are higher than at any time since the end of the Cold War. Section 9. Echoes of the Cold War. A New World Disorder. The world today is a complex and dangerous place. The US and Russia are no longer locked in a global ideological struggle, but their rivalry has taken on new and dangerous dimensions. Cyber warfare, disinformation campaigns, and proxy conflicts have become the new battlegrounds. The threat of nuclear war may have receded, but it has not disappeared. The US and Russia possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. The rise of China as a global power further complicates the picture. China's growing economic and military might pose as a challenge to both the US and Russia. The world is now multipolar, with no clear hegemon. Section 10. Conclusion. The future of global power. The rivalry between the United States and Russia has defined the past century. It will continue to shape the 21st century, but in unpredictable ways. The Cold War may be over, but the struggle for global supremacy continues. Whether the future holds conflict or cooperation will depend on the choices that the US, Russia, and other major powers make in the years to come. One thing is certain, the stakes are higher than ever before. The future of the world may depend on it.